This project is made almost entirely out of XPS foam. Besides the foam, I will use a small amount of cardboard and some screws, but for the most part, it's all XPS. XPS is really a great product to use for craft making. If you haven't used it yet, you should try it out. Anyway, I start out by cutting my supporting pieces for the manger, the two side pieces and the larger back wall. Once you have one side wall cut out, it can be used as a template to trace the other one. One important thing to note is that I try to make several passes to cut completely through the foam. You will get a much cleaner cut this way. If you try to cut all the way through the foam at once, you'll probably booger it up and not be happy with it. I would also recommend using a heavier duty utility knife, but I just use what I had at my work table at the moment. Once you have the wall pieces cut out, I start out detailing the brickwork of the side pieces. When you do the detail work, you want to make sure to dig in and make some deep grooves. The deep grooves help to show all of the detail later on when you paint and do your dry brushing. Texture work on the stucco and the brick, I just use a rolled up ball of aluminum foil and roll it around. I also use my knife to make some scratches and cuts to the foam, as well as carve off some corners and just shape things to my liking. Now that we have our two side walls and the back wall cut out and textured, it's time to put a coat of primer on. This is made up of Mod Podge and black paint. It's actually a deep charcoal gray, that's what I had at the time. The Mod Podge helps to stiffen the foam and give it some strength, and the black paint just helps those deep grooves show a lot of detail later in the process. I would give you measurements for what I'm doing here, but that's really not going to matter. This is based on the figures that I have, so, you would just have to base your measurements on what you have. Now that everything has a coat of the Mod Podge and it's dry, it's time to dry brush the first layer of paint. For this, I'm using burnt umber. You might notice I'm not doing a strict dry brush technique here, but as I apply each coat, I try to go a little bit lighter and thinner with each of the following layers. My second layer is chestnut color. Third layer is a beige looking color called Warm Buff. All of the paint that I'm using is the Apple Barrel brand. You can find it at Walmart. I typically get the cheapest I can find. Due to biodynamics, you gotta cut a few corners wherever you can these days, right? For the last layer, I'm using a straight white to finish off the stucco. So far, I'm happy with how the texture and the colors are turning out. The texture gives it a good aged look and a lot of character. Now that all of the stucco is finished, it's time to focus on the brick. I already have a coat of burnt umber on the brick. My next color is called Orange Spice. I wanted the brick to have a red clay sort of look, and the orange spice over the burnt umber gets me close to that look. Once again, for the last layer, I'm using the Warm Buff. here's a look at what I have made at this point. The two end walls and the back wall, which is going to be the backdrop for baby Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Now that I have the walls, I need to make some things to help start tying all of it together. The next step is to start with a beam and some rafters. For the large beam across the front of the manger, I cut a 1x1 by about 16 inches in XPS foam and use a wire brush to scrape out some wood grain on all of the sides. You might notice that there's a big divot on one side of the beam. I thought about redoing it, but after I finished with the grain, I actually liked the way it looked. Sometimes the imperfections give it more character, kind of like people, I guess. Make sure to rough up the ends of the foam also. Just like before, since we have it cut and textured, we add a good coat of Mod Podge and let it dry. Feel free to use a hairdryer to speed up this process. Once the Mod Podge is dried, I put on a pretty solid coat of burnt umber. For the second layer, I'm dry brushing a coat of chestnut. The final dry brush is going to be the warm buff. Remember that each successive layer is a little bit thinner and drier than the one before. As you put this final layer on, just dry brush it until it looks the way you want it to. There's no perfect way to do it. If you like it, that's the way it's supposed to be. Now that I have the timber painted and it's dry, let's go ahead and put some things together. The beam will go from one brick column to the other. I'm using the back wall to help me gauge where everything should be. Use some PVA glue to help hold things together. Now, I don't know if other people use screws and things like this, but I wanted to try it. It helped out a lot. Everything that I put a screw in just stayed in place. Just be careful when using the screws to make sure that you're going in straight. You don't want it to come out the side of the foam. It can cause a lot of damage. Let's go ahead and attach the back to the sides. Same way as we did before, a little bit of PVA glue and some screws. I have to say that I'm pretty pleased with the way the screws worked out. It was very easy to move things around and not worry about anything coming apart on you. Now that the walls are together and the beams in place, I need to make some rafters. I've got one cut out, and like before, I used that one as a template to mark the others. The process for painting is just like what I did for the big beam. For this part, I just used toothpicks and glue to attach the rafters. I like using the screws, but the rafters would be too small for that. So here's the one and only piece of cardboard that I used for this. I'm happy to recycle part of an Amazon box whenever I get the chance. I needed the cardboard to go across the rafters to help with the structure and to hold the shingles. For the shingles, I had a bunch of XPS foam strips already cut for another project that I had started. Now, not everyone is going to want to do this. It is time consuming, but I don't mind it. It's a bit meditative for me. Just take the hot wire foam cutter and melt one edge of the strip like you see here. It makes it look similar to cedar shakes, or it could maybe even be used as a thatch roof material. And while you were not looking, I cut and textured some trim to cover up the exposed edges of the cardboard. Now that we are hot gluing some shingles on the roof, notice that the cardboard has a coat of black Mod Podge. When you do that, make sure you paint both sides at the same time and lean it somewhere and just let it dry. Doing both sides will help keep it from warping on you. Once all of the shingles are on the roof, we'll go through the same process as we did with the beam and rafters. A good coat of the black Mod Podge, a coat of burnt umber, a dry brush of chestnut, and a dry brush of warm buff. Now that we have everything pieced together, we need a base to set it on. I wanted the base to be kind of rough and rocky. I used the hot wire foam cutter to cut out some jagged edges around the foam. After using the hot wire foam cutter, take a knife and further shape the XPS to your liking. After it's cut and textured, we'll put a good coat of the black Mod Podge. Next is a solid coat of burnt umber, a dry brush of chestnut, last is a dry brush of the warm buff. Once our base is dry, we go through the same process as before to attach the base and the manger. And there you have it. We now have a nativity set. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, guys. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought. Merry Christmas, y'all.